let's start off with the word authenticity. It's such a buzzword. Everyone says it, be your most authentic self, but we often don't talk about like, what the hell does that even mean, right? So for you, when you hear that word, what comes to mind for you?
I was actually named after my grandmother. So it has been a real golden thread for me to think about, how am I showing up authentically as representing her and her legacy? So in terms of authenticity, it took me a while to figure this piece out, that you have to figure out who you're not before you really show up as who you want to be. And I had to go through years of really sifting. Okay, that didn't feel good to me, because I'm a real feeler. Like, you just have to, are you, do you ponder at night? Do you write down? I just feel things out. And every situation I leave, I say, okay, how did I feel about that? How did I show up? And it's not to overanalyze, but it is to really kind of figure out what you're not. And so me showing up authentically is just really, proud that I'm representing my namesake, my family, and really kind of showing up as the tidbits that I think are kind of my mini gifts, right? So coalition building. How am I bringing people together at a table? I feel like one of my authenticity points is real diplomacy. I love to bring people together and find common ground. And so, the little ways that I could do that throughout my day really feel great to me and make me feel authentic.
Tell me about when you were growing up. Was it easy to live up to that definition that you're describing? Because it's interesting, you mentioned authenticity. Part of it is figuring out what you are not. And I think growing up, we often have these shoulds, right, around like what we are supposed to be, or even like expectations or pressure that even our families and friends think what our life should look like. Tell me about that experience.
Well, so my family, I grew up on the south side of Chicago in Gage Park. Very proud of the fact, born and raised in Gage Park in Chicago. And, my family was interesting in the perspective of how they brought me up. So they met at a community center in Pilsen, in Chicago. It's a predominantly Mexicano community. My father was a muralist and a painter and art teacher. And my mother was like an after school health nurse, jack of all trades. And so they met, fell in love, a Puerto Rican and a Mexican, unheard of at that time. Very West Side Story. Yeah. And, but yeah, they started a family, and their family, the basis of our entire family has been always community driven. When at the start of, I want to say like 8, they had me working in the same community center, giving back, like working with the kids that were always younger, like doing tutoring, neighborhood cleanup. Something as simple as that was really ingrained to my siblings and I. And so kind of growing up, I always had the foundation of, okay, I think public service is at the core of my family, but also I was named after my grandmother, and she was the matriarch of the family. She had 10 children, moved from Mexico, Durango to Chicago West Side, and lived in, 1-bedroom apartment, and really kind of made a way and a pathway for her family to be successful. And so it was a little bit of pressure, all my aunts and uncles, Micaela, like, it's almost like I had to really kind of live up to it. And the moment I started to really let go, sometimes detachment allows more things in to flow. And so it wasn't until I just started, feeling me out and listening to my inner voice, really kind of leaning in on my family and the values that they ingrained in me, were the times where I felt most successful. And that was giving back. So, yeah.
There's so much we need to get into there. I mean, talk about old school. Your parents met at a community center? Like, that is crazy. It's so romantic.
At a disco.
At a disco.
Like yeah.
That's adorable. It's fascinating too, like your description of not only the community center, but the neighborhood of Pilsen, right? I'm getting this visual representation, but I'd love for you to maybe describe it for us in a little bit more detail. Like what did it look like? Who were the people there? You said it was majority Hispanic, right? Or Mexican?
Yeah, yeah. So Pilsen is a beautiful neighborhood in Chicago, and it is so rich with culture. And so a lot of Mexicanos came there, and there was a very big Chicano movement back 70s, 80s, but really it's centered on art through activism, or activism through art. And so my father was really a part of that movement. And so essentially, what they would do is create these murals. So Pilsen's known for its murals today, along like there, it's like storyboarding in
Hmm.
community. It's insane. And so I'll give you a prime example. So recently, my father was part of like a committee that um, restored a mural in Pilsen. And so it was about a David Boogie Gonzalez. He was an activist back in the 70s, and he was a peacekeeper. And this is at the time where gang violence was, rampant through the neighborhood. But people were really staying strong to the idea that Latinos don't have to be segregated. Cubanos and Mexicanos and Puerto Ricanas can, get get together and share great family values, but also show up in the world, empowering each other, but also Black and Brown people. And so, unfortunately, so there was a peace rally in which he was shot through the heart, and so they dedicated back in the 80s a mural to him, just to kind of prove that he was fighting on the front line every day to bring these communities together to find common place. And so they recently restored that, and it's beautiful. Like, it's vibrant colors, like the brightest. Think of like these are like very traditional Mexican
Hmm.
artwork that you can wear visually, like all around you walking through that neighborhood. So that's how I would visualize it. But that's the beauty of that community. They really show up with their heart on the sleeve, and you can see it through walking the streets.
I love that story. And I love so many different forms of art, but in particular, murals hold like a very special place in my heart because I feel like growing up, art, I've seen it historically been like gate kept, right? Like you only
Mm,
see art in, or at least my idea of quote unquote quality art was like, oh, well, it's in a museum. It has to be beautiful art, right? And I went to this exhibit by Banksy, and he said intention he said that his art, although he's like one of the most famous artists of the last decade, he was like, you'll never see my art in a museum because they don't see it as quality art, right? And he says the reason why he in particular loves street art, he said that art belongs essentially to the community. Like by gatekeeping it in museums, you limit the number of people that have access to it, right?
hmm.
Whereas the beauty that I see of art is that everyone is able to see it, right? With the murals. But and I'm getting goosebumps just like thinking about this, right? But when I think of murals, I think most people think of like the beautification potentially of a neighborhood, but there's so much education that comes out of art, right? Like that example, someone is going to walk by that and say like, wow, that's beautiful. But another person may walk by and say, that's beautiful. And I wonder what this means. I wonder why this is
Absolutely.
placed in this neighborhood. I wonder who that person is, right? And then does the research, and then has a whole other appreciation for not only the art, the neighborhood, the culture. It's just fascinating. And I think for you, it's interesting, right? Like growing up in this time, in this neighborhood, I'm envisioning kind of a duality when it comes to the culture, right? Because on one side, there's gang violence, there's a perception that the media is putting out there of your culture and what it stands for, yet there's this completely other movement of people taking the narrative into their own hands, right? And cultivating this like, no, we do a lot, and it's not just this one negative perception that y'all are putting out there, right? I'm curious for you, like what sort of impact did that have on your identity, this like duality of the narratives?
Man, what I'll say to that is, particularly growing up in high school, I went to a local high school on the Southwest side. So essentially, if you don't test into a magnet school in Chicago. You go to your local high school. It's like a typical process, but mine was heavily Latino and African American. And so what I was seeing firsthand was I was a little sheltered growing up, in the sense that, I didn't understand how good I had it by having a nuclear family that was together. My mother and my father were together. I didn't grow up in a single family home. We were, low to middle income. Like we definitely, there were some weeks where, maybe the pork chops didn't make the plate, but we had always rice, beans, tortillas. Like we didn't have to worry, right? But then I so growing up, I actually had really bad dyslexia, and didn't catch that till maybe sixth, seventh grade. So, I was a average D plus, C minus student in grade school. So, I wasn't a brilliant child per se, but in terms of my brilliance, like I showed up by making friends. Like my report card always said, if she didn't talk as much, she could really learn. She's like really chatty. She's too much of a social butterfly. And I didn't know, like my mother was like, just sit down, listen to the teacher. And I just couldn't, I didn't know what was on the board. I didn't understand half of what they were saying. So I just kind of made it my own. And going into high school, I went to obviously I wasn't able to test into a magnet school for high school. And it was my first slap in the face of, oh, I don't know who I am. And so who do I want to be? I want to be everyone's friend. And I really just want to be accepted. Like that was part of my, like, I think core wound. I just wanted to be liked by everyone. And at 14 and 15, when you're in a school with heavy gang violence, I really fell into that. And, with the duality of going to school in a neighborhood, but living in a rival gang territory, I almost felt like I had to choose, right? Like I had to choose my friends. And it was consistently conflicting with what my parents taught me, right? Stand your own, take care of your community. But I was consistently denying that version of myself just to be accepted. And I thought, the way to acceptance was, protection, right? I needed a way to get home. There was at one point, I couldn't cross the street to go to the train station, which was on an opposite gang rival, because I had to go back east, which means I lived somewhere else. So I had to walk it, or my mother had to pick me up because I was consistently getting into fights and falling into the wrong crowd. So it was such a crash course into like identity, to the point where I then turned 16 and I had a really, monumental moment in my life where, a friend of mine right in front of me was shot 5 times. And I had to really have the experience and like look back and realize my parents saw that as, we have to get her out and get her into another environment. So they gave up custody of me so that I could go to a different environment and live and go to a different high school. And so that is very rare. I mean, to have that family structure to recognize, okay, she's not doing well in this environment, she's consistently getting herself in situations that are dangerous. I was lucky in that sense, and really, turned a page at that point to say, okay, I think I want to take back control of my identity and how I show up in the world. So community, identity, all of that, like was my high school experience. And then from that point on, I just built who I wanted to be.
How did you start building who you wanted to be after that point?
Okay, I did it the wrong way. I
What
did it the
actions did
wrong
you
way at
take?
first.
Okay, okay.
Okay, so what happened was I tried to be almost the exact opposite. Like my brain back then worked, okay, if that's not who I want to be, let me go as far away as possible to the north side of Chicago. So I'm from the south side. Far away from me was north side. And I think Southsiders will understand that because it's like a world in and of itself. Like I like only hung out on the South Side. So I went to DePaul University, and I remember thinking, okay, this is my moment. Nobody knows me. Let me reinvent myself. And so I started to like overcompensate. Signed up for every club, was president of my sorority, was like, my Latina sorority, multicultural, which was another defining moment. But I started to just like, I think I did it in the way that wasn't authentic to me. Because at the core of me, those experiences shaped me. But if anything, I was actually trying to reject that, to the point where I would run into people from high school and they wouldn't recognize me. Now growth, right? Like there is a balance between needing to really kind of show up and I'm really big on I'm like a extremely curious person. So I'm consistently reading, learning. It's just an insatiable feeling to me to consistently learn. And so I wanted to show up differently. And so it wasn't until I started to merge, maybe towards the end of college, maybe in my first job, where I started actually community organizing and being on the ground, working with constituents through government and politics, that I understood that, oh, I don't have to be ashamed of where I've come from. I don't have to be, actually, I could be really bold about my experiences and not have to deny that part of me, but that's what makes me me. So those were my two-step process. You kind of had to do it wrong. Like, again, you have to like figure out what you're not to figure out what you are. So
That's another fascinating visual. I'm just imagining you like walking down the street and casually bumping into someone from high school, and you're like, "Oh my God, hey!" And then people are like, "Do I know you?" You know what I
oh
mean?
my friends to this day, they make a joke of it. They're like, "Oh, Southside Mika is out today." Like, I used
No.
to, and I wear proud. I wear very proud. Like, but it was to the point where I would dress a certain type of way, I would talk a certain way. I was only hanging out with certain people that all of a sudden they're like, "Wait, that's that same Mika that I used to know back then." No,
Tell me
so
about
yeah.
it. What did that look like, sound like, feel like from South Side to North Side Mika?
Okay, all right. So essentially, okay, now this is back in my day. So this was like, okay, '06, where you would wear a jersey and you would have matching headbands. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
So like
yeah,
if you
yeah.
were wearing a Lakers jersey, you would wear your yellow and purple headbands. And like I did the crispy you know what I'm talking about, like the crispy like hair, the crunchy hair, and you would have
Okay.
two bangs right in front of you that you would straighten. Anyways, this is
Okay.
totally a girl talk, but
Is this a
and
jersey
then
dress? Is this what you was doing?
well, you could do a jersey dress, but I did baggy jerseys, and then I
Okay.
wear joggers and Air Force One,
Okay.
and yeah, it's just like if that was the other thing was matching belts with the
Yeah, yeah,
with
yeah.
the yeah. So all of that comparatively to just how I wanted. So in college, so this is how reverse it was. I never wore anything other than heels. I don't know.
In
I felt like that's
college.
like what professional people did. I trekked it across campus in like boots and heels. I did not care because I didn't want to be the joggers and gym shoes girl. But I can be casual and authentic. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I loved my journey. I loved the fact that like I tried out different like versions, I guess, of myself. But I'll be honest, in the past year and a half, no, my gosh, it's been about 2 years now, where I've gone on a real personal journey, deep, personal journey where I have been asking like the next level of myself. Okay, how do I want to show up now that I know the things that I know, and I do wear my heart in my sleeve. And it's been an amazing journey. Therapy, spiritual experiences, all the while of building my career. It's been exhausting, but very given me a lot of hope.
No, I appreciate that. the explanation of the visual. I think for people listening, watching, all of those things,
They'll
even
get
without the picture,
it.
they 100% get it. But I think even that description of the heels and the boots compared to, the joggers and the sneakers, when I entered corporate, or I had my first internship, my representation was just the people I worked with, right? So I looked at my manager as a mannequin. I was like, all right, yo, what is this outfit? I'm buying that same exact outfit, right? And besides seeing the representation, I used to take classes in college. It was kind of like internship prep classes where they would teach you how to be a quote unquote professional, right? So they would teach you how to dress. They would tell you what to do, what not to do, how to approach certain things, right? So in many ways, the academic institutions that we grow up in, like they kind of prepare us for the workforce, right? I'm assuming, was that the similar reason as to why you started sort of like visually changing yourself a little bit?
Oh, for sure. Well, what I started to look for was my interpretation of a mannequin, right? So I tried to look for Latinas that were doing awesome, amazing things, and essentially mimic what they were doing and how they were showing up. So I had one particular mentor that I had since high school into college, and I saw where she lived. I saw, if you can't see it, then you don't understand that it's a possibility. But with her, I thought, okay, this is the exact way I should show up. But then I actually got into public service, and it was in a situation where I was working in a Latino community, and a very, very, touchy, I guess you could say, sensitive part of myself is that I'm not fluent in Spanish. And that just, it has never sat right with me. Like, I've never felt fully belonging to my community because I don't speak the language. And then I go find a job that requires me to connect with only Spanish speaking constituents. So I actually went to go work at a alderman's office in my same community after college. It was like full circle. So I go back to my community of Gage Park, work in an aldermanic role, just kind of working with constituents on a day-to-day basis. And I couldn't communicate with them. That was really, really tough for me. I started to figure out, okay, let me just center myself. There are so many Latinos that are not fluent in Spanish and still have so much value to bring, because I am in touch with my heritage and my identity, and so I can bring that to my community in my job, in my role, not just through language. And so I started to look for different versions of that. I've met so many people that I appreciate, and I find so much, we have a great working relationship, and they don't speak Spanish, right? So that, the language, as well as the physical, how do you show up to work? I actually came to work in a satin. Okay, I'm going to give you another visual.
Is this
A
like
satin suit.
is this like the first day of work?
So it's actually my interview. Now that I think about it. So I came, and this is a like community office, right? Like, you're basically out in the field. You report if people have tree trims that they need, or their street light is out, any city service, we represented the families in our community. I came in a satin suit with like my DePaul portfolio, and they're like, okay, just so you know, you don't have to dress up for this. Like, you're gonna be, sitting behind a desk either majority of the day and interacting with constituents. But you know what was crazy? It felt good to me to dress the way I wanted to. So that's when I started to really like, you know what? I can show up however, as long as I'm doing my job. Like, that's how I'm going to show up. So I started to tweak that along the way, and as long as you do a good job, you can actually get away with a lot of things. So.
And what were some of the things that you started to tweak? Because what I've found is that it's not just one day that we just show up completely different. It may be, ooh, you know what? Next time I'm gonna wear the same suit, but instead of, I'm only gonna wear the top of the suit, I'm gonna wear jeans, or I'm gonna wear the suit but without the blazer, or I'm gonna wear the suit
Yeah.
but it's gonna be a blouse instead of a button up under, right? I'm gonna, you know what? Instead of doing a neutral color, I'm gonna add some flair to my nails. Like, what sort of layers did you start peeling back or revealing at, and started to get more comfortable in yourself?
Well, actually, it started on a like mind level. So what I started to realize was like I have a really like I have a creative side, but I'm not an artist. I'm not, I can't, you know, make you a mural like my father can. But how I show up in my creativity is through my personal appearance, like through my personal style. And also through what was making me, I started to just feel out what made me happy. And like being in creative energy did that. And so I actually take breaks to paint. I do puzzles while on the phone if I have phone calls, doing like putting together like Friday nights, that's my jam. Like this is when you're 30, 31. Right. Friday nights I stay home and I do a big puzzle. Like it I don't know, it's part of now my routine of staying in my creative energy, knowing that that is a really, really authentic part of myself. It's probably passed down from my parents. And okay, I'm not artistic, but I can really add a lot of infusion of energy into the work that I do, which is, government consulting, really, really working with mutual relationships, building relationships across the city. I do that by staying in my creative energy. And so it's like my personal style. I don't care if I'm overdressed. Now, I used to really think, what are you wearing? What are you wearing? Like now it's none of that. And so how am I feeling? If I feel good, I am showing up the way I want to in the world. And so those are the little tweaks that took over a decade to make.
Wait, so did you bring like puzzles and sketchbooks to work?
Okay, so I I did, and it didn't go so well. So there was a time where I had to really just take a moment about in 2018, where I had really done a lot of the work that I had set out to do. Like and we were talking about this a little bit before the podcast started, but I have a history of just up leveling myself to my detriment, where I would never enjoy the journey. I would just want the feeling of achieving the goal I set out. And then immediately, it's a human instinct to do this, set the next goal. And so I was on this constant role. And so I went from doing constituent work. I wanted to go in international relations. I ended up doing municipal policy. I was working at the county with an elected official. Started to understand politics now, like on the opposite side. How do you elect somebody? How do you run a campaign? How do you fundraise? Latinos have a really, really hard time fundraising, but I wanted to really build that side of myself. And I realized this in 2018, that I cannot be my most authentic self in a 9 to 5. And it's because I couldn't take those breaks that I knew I needed. First of all, I don't have endless energy. I'm a very finite. I actually am very efficient when I work. I can get all the work that someone does in 8 hours in 3.5. And so the other 6 hours, I was finding myself needing the painting. I wanted to paint, or I wanted to do a puzzle or journal, something as simple as that. But I had kind of this, I was a manager at the time. I had employees to kind of think about what was the environment setting. And so I have always had an entrepreneurial spirit and said, okay, I think I need to design my own life now. And I'm going to go take the risk, because I'm in a position where you eat what you kill. So it's like, how many contracts can you get? And if you don't get any, you don't have money that month. So I was like, I'm willing to take that risk, because I knew I would be so much better in my job if I had the structure that supported it.
That's fascinating, and it resonates with me so much. I remember when I was working at Facebook, I used to get criticized because I didn't work at my desk. And for people that are listening and they think about the Facebook office or the Google office, like all these like really big tech companies, it's a dope office. I mean, there's art everywhere, there's snacks everywhere, there's a library where you can work and like no one's allowed to make any noise. There's a cafeteria. I mean, there are dozens, if not hundreds of different areas to work besides your desk. And I'm the type of person that maybe it's, hashtag only child, but I like to work independently. Like I get distracted really easily. So I don't like to work on my desk because people come up to you like, oh, how you doing? People just talk to you and I just get distracted. So I like to work in like really secluded areas by myself. So people used to tell me that I wasn't being friendly, that I should spend more time at my desk, all these things. And I'm just like, well, you all just don't get my work style, right? So
Mhm.
there's so many things about like the 9 to 5, quote unquote, or like the corporate America way of working that I find difficult. And I used to get criticized, hence, but I'm still getting my work done, right? So that idea of authenticity, sort of like a conflict with traditional standards of productivity, is like fascinating to me. But I'm also curious for you, right? You tried it though, right? And I'd love to get an idea of what was some of the pushback that you received during that time though.
Well, I mean, in a very bureaucratic system like government, especially because you are getting paid on taxpayer money, it is it's a unique environment. I went it was definitely an outlier for the typical corporate structure. And this is why corporations are really trying to find, I'm fascinated with the subject just like you are, like the Adam Grant, like the organizational psychology of things, right? And I read this book called The 4 Hour Work Week. Have you ever?
It's like, all right, so I had to put it down, but I'm gonna pick it back up. I didn't finish it.
Okay, yeah. If I when I scale my business, to include, people in their geniuses in their zones, because I definitely do. I have weaknesses. I hate doing invoices. I actually don't. I will delay getting paid because
Me too.
that to be in that mindset, I have to be really in a different energy. And all the while of like when my teachers when I was younger calling me too much of a social butterfly, in the government structure, I was building like the times where I didn't feel like being at a computer working on a policy legislation. I would go and relationship build with the other chiefs of staff, with the other government affairs people, and that would add a lot of value back to my employer. So I was very lucky that my employer felt a certain type of way. But it's like an old school structure, and you have to, if there's not a structure that is aligned with your best version of yourself, I would encourage anyone to go create it. It's 100% doable. Like Banksy, like your example of him, he's living so authentically. He created a new genre. It's completely in our possibility and in our own right to do that, to live so authentically that we create new pathways for other people to enjoy.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think a lot of people are taking that path. And I think corporations are missing out on so much talent because of these like old school structures. But I think the corporations that are going to win are going to adapt to the times and the demands that people are asking for. And I think COVID was a big reality check, right? I mean, something
Mhm.
as not simple, but a big shift that we're seeing even is just like working from anywhere, right? Like that's a huge change. So now people can incorporate the types of breaks that you're talking about and no one really knows.
Yeah. And
But yeah,
honestly, they don't care.
yeah.
It's you know what? It's taken a lot of load off of managers too.
Mhm.
It's like they were also living just by like, oh, this is just how it's done. And now there was this experiment that they were doing at a corporation about time blocking. So I'm a big time blocker. So
Same.
the conversation, what you were saying about when people approach you and it disrupts your groove of what you're working on, that loss of productivity is exponential in
Mhm.
those types of environments. And so I time block. Like I actually have no meetings when I try to avoid meetings in the morning, because that's when I'm my best writer self. I actually write in the morning as much as I can. And then I, put all my meetings in the afternoon if possible. And then I work out in the afternoon. It is like the best. I feel the best. I've gotten my meals in. I don't need to, check in with my, anybody, hey, can I run to the gym? Like, no, and then I actually get a bit of an energy after dinner, and I don't mind going back to work. It feels good to me. So I am like you. There is external thinkers and then internal. I'm an internal. When I'm brainstorming, I actually like to be in my own little bubble. But there are external thinkers that need to talk through ideas with others. And I would want to see in structures that those people are grouped. Like I would self-select into the internal brainstormers, and people can approach others that are open to that kind of brainstorming session. Like it would just work much better.
I've never actually heard the term of internal versus external thinker. I'm definitely more on the internal thinking side. And it's funny because my girlfriend is not an only child. And I just referencing only child because I think that has a huge impact, at least on me it did. But like we were even talking about like when we first started dating, she was like, oh, because I was like, oh, I need to feel productive as early as possible in order to just like have a good day, right? Like there's certain things I need to check off early in the day to just feel good about myself, right? And she was like, oh no, yeah, like let's work together. I was like, you don't get it. Like I can't work together.
Yeah.
And I was like, first of all, we're not even working on the same thing. She's like, no, like we'll just, be there together. And I was like,
next to each other. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, no, like that still doesn't work for me. Like, yeah, it was like really difficult to explain, right? But
can I ask you something?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, your morning routine, what is it?
In the morning, I like to literally just think for 2 hours. And when I say think, I'm saying like, I like to dream about like the possibility of whatever I'm working on, and then kind of like brainstorm around how would I get there? And then that typically informs what I'm going to do that day. And then I go through like the to-do list. I'm starting to work out because the entrepreneur stuff is new to me, right? So I'm like maybe 2 to 3 months into this. So now I'm getting to a groove of like, I do that in the morning. I go to a cafe. That's another thing. I need to go outside as soon as possible because I'm an extrovert. I don't need to talk to people, but I need to be around people. So I need to think as early as possible. I need to get like expand how I'm thinking about what I want to achieve. I need to see people as early as possible. Right after that, now that I'm caffeinated, I do something like on my to-do list so I feel productive. After that, I work out, and then I don't care what happens in the rest of the day. I need to, and I typically, depending on how I'm feeling, because I used to force myself to be creative, but now I'm more so like leaning into like, oh, I'm feeling creative. Let me take advantage of this creative energy and do as much as possible so that I can stretch it out for the week. For example, like I need to create TikTok videos. I'm like, maybe I'm not feeling creative today. Maybe I'll do it tomorrow. So like that ebbs and flows, but going outside, thinking in the morning, and being some sort of like productive to-do list, check the box, that needs to happen.
Oh, every great leader that I've read about actually schedules time to think. Richard Branson, all the Atomic Habit like lists, it makes a lot of sense that that prepares you because you are an internal brainstormer. Like you can form it. Some people cannot do this. They almost need that energy from other people to infuse their idea so it becomes bigger and bigger. You can do it within your own head. Yeah. And so when other people just, try to come in and intersect that, like it just throws you off. And I 100% resonate with that.
Yeah. And I like to collaborate, but give me time to do it on my own first before I connect with y'all. You know what I mean?
For sure. It makes no sense that we would place one process on, a billion humans and think it's all gonna, work the same way. It just doesn't. We're so unique. Yeah. And, I just don't want to subscribe to having it oh, because it's just the way that it's done. So we just should change it. Or and look at, we changed our environment. If the environment doesn't fit, then you have to do what you have to do.
I love that. And we spoke a little bit about maybe some of the pushback that you received, trying to incorporate, your authenticity and how you best work. But talk to me about some of the positives, right? Because since, starting to do more of your own thing, I would assume, and maybe this is just a story that I'm making up in my head, I would assume that you've become more productive, you've become more confident and comfortable. Tell me about that from a positive angle of you embracing more of your most authentic self. How has that impacted your work?
I had to take a pause, and this actually just happened yesterday. I was sitting in meditation. I don't do it often, but when I do feel like it really centers me. And I have to think about, when you got your first paycheck back in, okay, my first job paid me like $24,000 a year. It was something like, I remember I had to make $175 stretch every 2 weeks. I remember, like, based on my student loan bills and a couple other things, I had $175 for myself. And I would, go through and make sure, okay, I spent $5 on I'm 21 at the time, first job. And now sitting in this environment that I am at, basically requiring, this is my monthly retainer. It's kind of like you lose that first feeling of when you got your first job or your first paycheck. You're like, wow, I'm making, $21,000 or $24,000 a year. Like, this is amazing. Like, 175 is awesome. Now you almost have to try to recreate that experience, that feeling for you every day. Like, I almost try to do that. And that is a positive for me, in which I'm experiencing within my business now is, okay, I am so incredibly grateful. I actually had to check myself yesterday because I was like, how am I got to break, I got to get a multiple K month, and how do I get another client and all these things. And I'm like, whoa. Looking at the market, I'm actually above market rate, but it's because I only want to work with a certain amount of clients. And so because I know I don't have expendable energy, you get the best version of me. And that's why I do a lot of different work for one client. And I'm feeling that out right now. It feels really good. And then just kind of, moving that forward. And so I'm trying to recreate the feeling of that just appreciation for being in the position that I am in commanding whatever your market rate is, so that it feels really good, it feels really authentic, and people just get the most out of me. I just am I'm honestly deeply happy. I love my job. I never wake up and feel like, I never feel like that. And I'm tired. There's sometimes where I'm really tired because, maybe I'll work 4 hours one day and 20 hours on a weekend because something unexpected comes up, but I get energized by it. It actually, there's no other way around it. I just would hope and I would never imagine having a life that I didn't feel like this. So those are some of the positives, just of stepping into knowing myself, the self-awareness that you talked about in your morning routine. That's rare. And I strive for that all the time, every day.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm so happy for you just to see the person that you've become compared to the South Side, North Side person that you were like debating back in the day. But, our journey isn't done. We're still continuing to improve and work on ourselves. I'm curious, to close, what's that one thing that continues to inspire and empower you to continue being your most authentic self?
Whatever I do in my most purest authenticity, my most purest genius or zone of excellence, if I just stay solely in whatever I want to own, I can really create something awesome that people would appreciate and that people would benefit from. So if I'm doing my job and it's just my job to do, but I don't want to do it, I could potentially let others down. that could be benefiting from it. And so that is what continues to motivate me every day. I go back to the example of Banksy and having his art just be so pure and so him. Thank God he showed up the way that he did, or else we wouldn't be able to appreciate it. And so, whatever I add to the world, and I do really get motivated having one-on-one sessions, like talking to people about what I do, because I feel like, maybe that helped them that day. That checks the box for me. I could wake up the next morning and do it with so much more enthusiasm. So just the lane that you pick is yours to own. And if you don't, then who will?